Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the QT2 Systems podcast series, Why Mindset Matters in Endurance Sports and How a Coach Can Help the Athlete Navigate the Minefield. In this six-part series, we are welcomed by QT2 owner and head coach Tim Snow. Welcome back, Tim.
How's it going, Reem?
Good. So we are on to episode 4 right now. So far, we've talked about what mindset is and provided an overview of strategies that an athlete can use on race day to enhance performance or to race closer to what their potential is. And so talked first about managing, first setting and managing appropriate expectations. And then in the last episode, we talked about recognizing controllables and uncontrollables. And so today, episode 4, the focus is on true goal setting. So strategy number 3, true goal setting. So maybe you can start first by highlighting what a goal is versus a target and an outcome.
Yeah, so let's talk about what a goal is by talking about what it isn't, right? A goal is not I want to win or I want to podium or I want to qualify for Kona, right? That is, or I would say even I want to qualify for Boston is not a goal. Um, that's a different thing. Those are two different things. Um, A goal is something over which you have near total control. I think of a goal more than anything else. I think of a goal as a choice. Okay. And if you don't achieve a goal, then you it's typically because you chose not to. Okay. Um so a goal, for example, is I will be in bed by 9:30 every night. I will drink 24 ounces of water every couple of hours. I will have 3 servings of vegetables tonight. I will spend 5 minutes doing breath work. Those are goals, right? Targets are metric, right? Those are the kinds of things that I want to run a marathon in under 3 hours, or I want to run a 5K in under 20 minutes. Um, or I want my FTP or my critical power to be 270. Those are targets, right? And those are things over which you have some level of control, but not total control or near total control. It's not a choice, right? I think the best example is we do all of our training. We go through a whole macro cycle of training, and on race day, um, you 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 could expect to be able to hold 220 watts on the bike and run 8 minutes per mile on the run. And then all the training that you did, all the stuff points towards the ability to do that. And then you get out there and maybe your legs just don't have it, right?
Mhm.
Well, you didn't choose for your legs to not have it. Um, they just don't seem to have it, right? Or maybe it's blazing hot and you can't and that's something that's totally out of your control, right? And you're not making the choice not to hit 220 watts. You just, if you do, well, you could make the choice to make 200 to hit 220 watts, but you would overheat, right? So these are
Mhm.
things though which you don't have a t- you have some level of control but not total control. Okay. um so they're less choicey, right? Outcomes are things over which you have, I would say, very little control. They usually have to do with other people. um, and and that's kind of why I make the distinction between um, an outcome. I'm sorry, between qualifying for something like a Kona and qualifying for something like a Boston, right? Where um, qualifying for a Kona has everything to do. We'll see what the new standard does, right? But because that may play differently. I may have a different opinion a year from now. but traditionally qualifying for Kona or winning a race, what have you, right, has everything to do with other people,
Mhm.
right? And you have very little, you have almost no control of that, right? It's
Mhm.
and it's the difference. I mean, it's not like team sports. It's not like football. It's not like baseball or basketball, where you have some impact on another person's performance, right? In fact, if you do have an impact on somebody else's performance in the stuff we do, you get DQ'd, right? And the and so you just you can't you have no control over what they do. And for you to be successful, oftentimes everybody else has to fail,
Mhm.
right? And so that's kind of an outcome based thing. Boston, qualifying for Boston to me is a little more targety
Mhm.
because if you run a certain time, right, then chances are you'll qualify,
Mhm.
right? Now, whether that time is the standard as they say it, or 4 minutes below the standard based upon what everybody else is doing, is that's where it
Yeah.
gets a little mixed. That's a gray zone. But so those are the kind of the key differences. Like and it realms from for me, choice, some level of choice, no choice, right? You
Mhm.
choose to achieve your goals. You you choose to try to achieve your targets, right? But there may be something outside of you or within you that doesn't allow that. And you really have no choice over whether or not you achieve your outcomes.
Mhm.
And I think that it's really, really important to make that distinction um, between those things because you so often hear, if you speak to an athlete and then my goal is, right. And the little voice in my head, as soon as somebody says my goal is, I say, well, let's see how this comes out. Like, which bucket is this going to fall into, right? And it's oftentimes an outcome based
Sure.
goal, right? Um, I want to qualify for Kona, and say, okay. I had an athlete the other day, like, reach out to me, and they're racing this weekend, and they want to. My goal is to win the race. And I said, no, your goal is to go out and race as hard and as well as you possibly can. And
Mhm.
if you end up winning, well, that's great, right? That's a bonus. Um, but the I kind of I'm annoying because I overcorrect every single time I hear somebody say goal. I overcorrect. I correct it back. But I think it's an important distinction because that athlete who wants to go and win this weekend could have the race of their life, right?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't result in a win, it was a failure.
Right.
And that doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
Because for this person, if what if we were we were talking about Gwen Jorgensen, right? What if Gwen Jorgensen, and this is just a local race, were to show up at this local race, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, you ain't gonna win, right?
Yeah. Right.
And but that shouldn't impact how you feel about your performance.
Right.
And so the way I see it, or the way we've talked about it over the years, is you make certain choices, right? Or you make certain choices. Those choices help you to achieve the best targets that you
Mhm.
can, and
Mhm.
those targets help you to have the best possible outcomes. Okay, but it all starts back here, with what goals really are, and
Mhm.
setting that kind of tone for yourself.
Mhm.
Here, how am I going to basically sit down with yourself, and where a coach can help is identify um like, all right, we need to put on 10 watts. Okay. Very rarely for an experienced athlete is the pathway to 10 watts by working harder, right? It's usually by making some change in the time before the working harder that allows you to work harder. right? And maybe that's getting to bed early, bigger protein focus, more time in the gym, just kind of throwing random ideas out there. But it's really rooted in developing like what are the things that I could do better as an athlete? How could I improve? Right? Not from a metric standpoint, but from my
Mhm.
behavior as an athlete.
Mhm.
Well, and that I guess one thing when I was racing at at a pro with a pro license, I'll use that word rather than level. When I was racing with a pro license, I decided that I was getting towards the end, and I wasn't really quite sure when to um just kind of hang that piece of things up. And I remember having just kind of I was probably out on a run or a ride, and I said, I think that when I'm no longer making the sacrifices, or I'm no longer making the choices like a pro would make. That's probably the time for me to let it go, right?
Mhm.
And I won't say that it ended up being a conscious choice or anything like that, but I would say that that's mostly how it panned out
Mhm.
was you know I wasn't doing the things that needed to be done. And it wasn't that I couldn't do the things that couldn't be done. I was just choosing not to do the things that need
Mhm.
to be done. Um, and therefore I was not hitting the targets that I would need to hit to have the outcomes that would prolong the that piece of a career. And so I just really think it's so important, because the last thing you would ever um and I think that honestly, I honestly think that we'll see. But there's something that I really like about the new Ironman qualification system that I think speaks to this. All right,
Okay.
I think I'm right. I haven't done a boatload of research, but upon the first passing of it, this jumped out to me, was that you know uh, uh, in the past you could have the race of your life. And if there were five slots and you came in sixth,
Mhm.
it was as if
Mhm.
you had a terrible race, right? And now you could have the race of your life, and as long as it looks like the race of your life relative to the others, right? That
Mhm.
placement piece is not that it doesn't matter. It still matters. There's still, you know, street number spots, right? But you're more apt. You won't be penalized, right, by the lack of slots, probably,
And
right?
that's, yeah, I mean, and that I looked at the new, I mean, World Championship qualification. It almost looks like how USA Triathlon is always used with the rankings. Because if you come in first, second, third, or fourth, it's not an absolute thing. It's how you're doing relative to the markers in your field, you know. So fifth and sixth could be really tightly numbered to each other.
Exactly,
If you are
exactly.
finishing close, if you're finishing 2 minutes apart, those aren't really like it just happens that one came in fifth and sixth, you know, versus if there's 30 minutes difference between them, then the weighting is different.
And I think that allows the idea of, I want to qualify for Kona, that statement, which at one time was a goal and nothing but. No, I'm sorry. Was an outcome-based goal and nothing but an outcome-based goal, and allows it to creep towards the direction of being something more along the lines of a target. It's not. It doesn't fall into target territory, right?
Mhm.
But it's a blood relative. It's a hybrid. It becomes
Mhm.
a hybrid of the two. I think it's a slight hybrid, right? Because it's
Yeah.
still very dependent upon others, right? Extremely dependent upon others. But it does allow that the the execution piece to play a role.
Right.
Um, it gets a certain level of weight, which then the nice thing about that is it gets it closer to the choices
Right.
that you make and don't make, right? So you by virtue of that, it gets, yeah, yeah, it gets the idea of qualifying for Kona closer to being a choice that the athlete makes,
Mhm.
right? It's
Yeah,
not. It's not, right? But
it's not, but
yeah,
it's also not as much of a, well, it really depends on who shows up that day and how many people are in this field versus that field. And like, yeah,
right.
it's funny, over last weekend, I did a relay, and we had what I said was like a really stacked field. Like we were strong, I was super excited. I was the swimmer leg, and I was like, we're just going to crush this thing. We're going to win the relay. And when I showed up, it was the relay start was all, I mean, it was the women's field. And then there was one guy in there, and he had a Speedo on, and he looked about 20 years old. And I should have known right at that start that my dreams, our dreams of winning the relay were not there. And I got out of the water, and I was like, I had a really good swim. Like I was really excited about it. It was a strong swim. The water conditions were great. Swam a good line, finished, like ran, like I'm like, this is awesome. And then I found out later my time was good. It was like a really solid time, but this guy went like 115 per hundreds time. I was like, and there no like reality that ever would be that I could match that kind of pace.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
we ended up not winning the relay, although our cyclist and runner were strong. Like I lost 6 minutes on a swim. And I'm like, but so I should have been happy that I had a really good swim, but instead I was like, we didn't win. And that was like,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's
expectation
exactly
going
it.
into it.
That's
Yeah,
exactly the issue, right?
yeah, yeah.
Is you were totally misaligned. And we all do this, right? We certainly all do it. But you were totally misaligned because you were setting your success based off of something that had very little to do with your control. And it kind of, you think like, and I think a lot of this has to do with some of the different mindsets, in terms of like um being motivated by the achievement of success versus being motivated by the avoidance of failure, right? There's a certain mindset who or people who would find satisfaction in having a subpar performance
Mhm.
if the outcome was good,
Yeah,
right? And to me, that just reeks of the idea of somebody who's motivated by the avoidance of failure,
yeah.
right? Versus a person who's much more process oriented, right?
Mhm.
And if they're going to evaluate their performance based upon their performance, right?
Mhm.
Not how it measured against somebody else. And that's somebody who's more motivated by the achievement of success. And not that we're very rarely one or the other, right? We kind of go back and forth in different aspects of what we do. Um, but that's it's such a fear, and I think it's just something that really needs a ton of correction. I think as coaches, we probably need to do a better job of, say, formalizing things, now that I think of it, right? In terms of laying out, with an athlete, all right, what are the choices that you can make that you want to get here, right? Like you would love to get here, right? What's it going to take to get here? It's going to
Mhm.
take these kinds of numbers, these kinds of targets. Okay. Well, this is where we are, right? Relative to those numbers. We have this gap. We're
Mhm.
here and these numbers are here, right? So we have this gap. How are we going to fill this gap, right? Well, that's over here. Those are the choices. What are we going to do on a daily basis, habitually, right? To make it so we can fill that gap so that hopefully this outcome. Um, and that's probably certainly something that we need to really take a good hard look at to help athletes in that process, right? Because it's so natural to to think of the goal, right? As think of the outcome as the goal, right? And we need to break that. We just need to break that.
So let me ask you, let's say this scenario for the athlete that walked in and said, my goal is to win the race. What if the athlete had the list of all the athletes in advance and looked at that list and said, I can win this race based on knowing who is showing up? Is that any different, do you think? They
I think it
know
is different. I think it is different because there's a piece of that. It's not a goal. It's still not a goal, right?
yeah.
But there's a piece of it that starts to even if it's informal, right? So it's like a subjective target, right? You know that I know that if I put my numbers against their numbers on paper, I should I should be faster, right?
Mhm.
Like we know enough about our um the way things should play out, and it's actually rather interesting. This particular athlete um does not like to know who is going to be at a race.
Hmm.
It's just very much does not like to know. And if they do know, they get very anxious. When I was racing too, like particularly on a local level, like I that if I knew who was on a start list on a coming weekend, that sat in my head a lot,
Yeah.
a real lot. Um, yeah, that's interesting. I think it does become a subjective target, or
Hmm.
or heads towards a subjective target versus just being purely an outcome, right? And I don't think there's necessarily anything totally wrong with that, right? Like if you know person X what they are at their best
Hmm.
versus what you are at your best, and you should be faster than them, when you're at their best versus their best, and you finish behind them, right?
Hmm.
That and it wasn't something outside of your control and all that. It was just like mano a mano, and you finish behind them, right? That's a de facto way, or another way of not meeting a target,
Hmm.
right? I don't necessarily think there's so much wrong with that level of evaluate analysis, right?
Hmm.
But it has to be that level of analysis,
Yeah.
right? Um,
So let's look at this though now. We say, okay, talking to an athlete, they say, this is the outcome I want. And you're like, no, you can't think about outcomes. What is the message though to an athlete that goes in? Because you can't be like, really. You have to make sure you take your gel every 30 minutes, get through a bottle every 45 minutes. Like, okay, yeah, we know we have to do that, but that's not like most athletes. They walk in, they're like, they have something in mind with how they want to be performing. So, how is that like from a coach's perspective? How do you work with an athlete to set up the sort of race day? I don't know, expectations is the right word, or just race day strategy, because it can't just be about getting a good night's sleep the night before, like what else is in there?
I mean, I think the furthest down that pathway I'll typically go is the targets,
Yeah.
and even those I think have to be relatively loose, right? The targets have to be a best case scenario, but a ceiling, right? Like there may also be perfectly good case where you need to, exist below these targets. Um, but I don't. I have had athletes ask me, um, how do you think I'll do? From the perspective of outcome from placement, right? And my best response is, I don't know. How the hell would I know? Right? Like I have no clue, right? Who's like, and I won't, I'm just not willing to really give the question an answer beyond that, right? Like it's just I can't I couldn't possibly know what the outcome will be, based upon the little I only know you. Right,
Mhm.
right. I don't know how you'll exist amongst the mass, right? Um, and so, yeah, I guess to answer your question would be, like to go so far as the targets, but the targets, the targets that, what kind of pace can I run, what kind of power can I maintain, um, that kind of stuff. Those, as indicated in training, those serve as a best case scenario, and we're going to exist in some kind of like realm, below and above, not, I'm sorry, not above, below best case scenario, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Do you find that there's any athletes that are better served without being given targets going into
yes,
a race?
100%, probably. Um, yes, and it is a massive fault of mine to feel like I must give targets. Um, I I have to fight the urge to give targets, right? And the this we should probably just do a podcast on this alone. I think that without I would say at least half of the athletes would probably be best served without targets. And I'm getting to a point where some of the changes in the style of training that we're doing really built around the idea and the model of specificity and race specificity and being so dialed in to um, I call like the feel of the intensity, not necessarily the numbers, but the feel. Um, one of my athletes, he just had an amazing race in Lake Placid, and he 5 hour bike, 3 hour marathon, just and he was so dialed in. We knew exactly what the race effort should feel
Mhm.
like. My only instruction to him was the day before was just go do what you've been doing.
Yeah.
Don't do more, right? Try not to do less, right?
Mhm.
And he just went and did it, right? And there were no targets, right? It was just so dialed into the feel of it.
Yeah.
But I think
That
I
only
think that
works.
what's that?
Yeah, I mean, that only works because they knew how hard. I mean, you knew from a number standpoint where you were trying to have them hit during practice, and then they internalize that feeling, right? So,
Yes, right. And that's a lot of the big change is like to think about specificity, really about the idea of specificity. Like we are literally practicing what you're gonna do. It's not about fitness. This is about like practicing what it's going to be like, not only from a feeling, race intensity feeling standpoint, but also from a positional standpoint while fueling. Like all of these things have to be true, right? So that you can just like have an understanding of what the intensity is, what the wattage is, what the pace is, without necessarily being dialed. That's knowing in front of you, right? Um, so do I think that a lot? I think when you give athletes targets, you gotta be really careful. And I have not been careful over the years, I have not been as careful as I should have been over the years because, and I did this to myself racing, right? Like, I think back and none of this was conscious at the time, but like I I was at mile 10 of an Ironman bike once, and in the old days, my bike computer just like shit the bed. It just like went kaput, right? I was totally blind. And I went, oh, all right, well, all right. And I just raced, right? And but I had been so dialed into numbers, 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 and everything I did, right? I just said, all right, well, I guess I'm supposed to fuel every 30 minutes, so I guess I'll just fuel at every 10-mile marker that I
yeah.
see, and I'll just kind of do that kind of stuff, right? And but what came out of it, I never wore a watch again when I
Yeah.
raced. Never again. I always raced totally blind, totally
Mhm.
blind. And I'm not saying that's for everyone, right? What I'm saying is, I think I recognized the impact that having things like kind of go backwards was having on me on a subconscious level, right? It's really hard to see the thing happening that's supposed to happen, say in an Ironman, right? What we used to do, like we would in an Ironman, we would go out really fast on the run, right? And then hold on for dear life, right? But the whole time you're seeing, and it worked. It really worked well, right? And it works. I shouldn't say it worked. It works really well. But the whole time you're seeing your average pace get slower, right? It's creeping towards where it's supposed to be,
Mhm.
but slow. It's getting slower. Well, that is a really challenging thing to manage from a psychological standpoint, right?
Mhm.
How do I manage the idea of how do I not allow the fact that I'm getting worse as I go
Yeah.
negatively impact me? How do I do that? Right. And so it's a tightrope, right? And anytime you put somebody onto a tightrope, there's a pretty decent chance that they'll fall off, right?
Mhm.
So you ask the question, is, I think most athletes, particularly triathletes, very type A, very, very success oriented, very high achievers, right? They um they don't really need to be told to go get them, right?
Mhm.
They're going to do that on their own. The numbers really should probably serve as a governor more
Mhm.
than anything else,
Mhm.
early, and like a dummy meter,
Yeah.
right? Um, and then after that, I think you can just rely on an endurance athlete's personality to take care of the rest.
Yeah. Back when I first started racing, we didn't have like all this stuff. I mean, power came into play at some point, but the watch was a Timex, so you're not like doing a lot looking down on them. And even still, I remember one year I was racing at nationals and I forgot to start my watch on the swim. I just forgot. So then I'm like, okay, I've got nothing. And it was one of the best races I've ever done. It's the same
Mm.
thing, because you're not like, I said, when I finish, I'll find out what my time was. And I was, remember being like, oh, that was pretty good. But taking away those, these all these mini comparisons as you go along and just focusing on what you're doing and how
Well, the name of the company is QT2 Systems, right? And the Q stands for quantitative, right? And it's quantitative triathlon training, right? And we were built to care about the numbers, right? The whole company was built upon the idea of the numbers, um, but probably to a fault. And um, the numbers, like we erred too far in the way of the numbers, and I think they we need to come back to some level of normalcy where they can be used to inform but not
right.
judge, right? One of my big things is if I have an athlete, so if I have an athlete using wattage during a race, and this is my own term that I created. It's totally inaccurate, but the idea, I call it cross-sectional wattage, right?
Mhm.
And what that means is when you look at your computer, right, the number that you see, right, should be somewhere in here, in this window, right? Not the average, not the normalized. I don't give a damn what those are. We'll worry about that after. Just the real time, not even the 3 second smoothing or anything like that. I want real time wattage, right? And it should, and so I call that just cross sectional. What's happening right now, right? And it should be in this range, okay? From that perspective, I think it can be useful. Okay,
Yeah.
as long as you give a wide enough range, right? To allow the athlete to not feel amazing,
Mhm.
right? Because I think a lot of times what we do is we set these targets based on numbers that are built off of amazing, right? And then an athlete goes out and they feel 95%, they don't feel 100%, right? But with the fact that we were expecting them, we set this tone of 100%, and there's a missing 5%, plummets them to 80%, right? So us going after this extra 5% loses 20%. And it's just not worth it, right? So I think we have to be really, really, really careful with the metrics um and stuff like that. But I do think they're valuable. I I think they get a little dangerous on the run because on the bike, it's is it the number's so all over the map that you can't even relate to it, right? Um on the run, you have I think you have a better sense of, I mean, because oftentimes we don't have real-time pace on the run. I think
Mhm.
wattage is real-time wattage is a better metric to use in order to create a separation between the number and the athlete. Um, but we often slip into the trap of using average pace. and often, when an average pace is creeping in the wrong direction, and whether or not you have any say in that matter, right? And that can be very negative. So from that perspective, I do like the idea of real-time wattage on the
Mhm.
screen, um, because that you give yourself a wide enough window to know that, okay, I'm in, like, all of everything I'm doing, right? And I use this a lot in training. I use this so much more in training than I do in racing, and I really should translate it more over to the racing. I use the word the spirit of the workout, right? Or the spirit of the intensity, right? And the physiologist that I talk to all the time, like, talks about the idea of your threshold not being a number.
Mhm.
It's a range of,
Mhm.
no, and there may be days when you're operating at this part of the range, but a lot of the time you're going to be here, right? And if you set everything based off of this, then
Mhm.
the days when you're here are going to feel really hard, right?
Mhm.
And so maintaining the spirit of things, right? And that goes back to the thing that I was able to tell that athlete in Lake Placid, which is just go do what you've been doing.
Yeah.
Don't do more, like, and try not to do less, right?
Mhm.
And that just dialed in. But like you said, we had practiced.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, I have an athlete who's I've been trying to get, she can do it on the run, but on the bike, like, can't get her intensity to where her race is. And it's not because she's not capable. She just, there's something that's disconnecting on there. And so I'm like, so if on race day, and she's a heart rate based athlete. So I'm like, if we can't hit that heart rate in practice, then on race day, you're never going to hit that heart rate. So then that sets something else that's, and if you try
mhm,
to. So in
mhm,
that one,
mhm,
if the goal is to keep on doing what you've been doing, then they're going to be racing under where they could potentially had they trained differently. But
right, right,
yeah,
right.
but your body knows. I mean,
Mhm,
that's at the end of the day. Yeah. I mean, I
mhm.
still, for all the numbers I use, I still rely a lot on perceived exertion when I race. So,
Yeah, your body knows, your mind knows a little less, but it knows. It doesn't
mhm,
know anything in the first, like, little bit of it. Like, that's no, but nobody's good at that, and that's why I like those metrics very early on. Like, you got to they keep people out of trouble.
mhm,
In an Ironman, I like to have control over the first 10 miles. Half Ironman, say 5 to 8 miles, right? On the run, I like to control, say, the first 3 miles of a 70.3, and an Ironman, say, the first 5 miles. After that, you don't have the ability to make dumb mistakes, right? After that, like, you can't all of a sudden just ratchet it down, 30 seconds per mile on the run, right? Good luck. I welcome that. I welcome you to try that, right?
mhm.
So I want to govern very early on, and then after that, just go.
Yeah.
Vaya con Dios. Right?
Yep. And then it gets to your Kona spot. If. All right, Tim, thank you. I think we've got a couple more episodes in the series, so looking forward to coming back and talking about the remaining strategies.
Excellent.